Hey, welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Deris. Joining me, he's a military vet and Latest.com senior political analyst from Pittsburgh, Josh Patton. And he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well from New York, Peter Van Buren. Well, the expectations for the vice presidential debate were extremely low, and yet Tim Kaine and Mike Pence were ready and willing to live down to expectations. I guess the consensus seems to be that Mike Pence won because he came off better than Kaine, but that really wasn't hard to do since Kaine actually did his job of trying to defend his candidate while Pence kind of pretended Trump didn't even exist. He just laughed off statements that Tim Kaine quoted verbatim, like they never even happened. He completely lied about a lot of the positions that Trump has taken and completely failed to actually defend Trump against any of the attacks. So, Josh, okay, Pence came off looking better on style points. Did he actually help his campaign?
That's always a big question. I think the power of the vice presidential debate to move the needle in terms, at least of opinion polls, is negligible. Unless Mike Pence had come out there and endorsed Hillary Clinton, I don't think anything would have really changed how people feel.
I would have loved if
but I
he
do
came
think
out
that
and asked people to save him.
Right, just like handed the moderator a note, like, please help me, I'm trapped. But I do think that I feel like each candidate did the job they set out to do. Kaine just wanted to make Mike Pence either have to own and defend Trump's positions or do what he did, which is lie and distance himself. Either one works for political ad fodder, which is really what this debate is mostly going to probably be remembered for, is as fodder for political ads. However, Pence did, it seems like he did a better job of putting out a persona of himself. You know, Tim Kaine was just like an overeager attack dog, almost seemingly working against the stereotype that he's America's nice stepdad. But I do think that Pence was able to pull that off as being even-tempered, which obviously because of the temperament issue, and just falling back on that old conservative radio host politician standby, which is when someone says something you don't like, just lie. Just go, no, that's not what it is. And as soon as he realized that the moderator was not going to be too heavy with the fact-checking, he had free reign to deny, and, at the very least, position himself as a potential standard bearer in the future for the party.
Peter, you were very vocal about Tim Kaine last night on Twitter. I take it you weren't a big fan of his performance?
Well, I was entertained. Let's put it that way, if that's the standard. I didn't quite figure out exactly who Tim Kaine was speaking to. Though Josh gave me as much of a hint as anyone else has that Kaine was simply trying to generate internet memes and fodder for some future political commercials. That makes as much sense as anything else. Because simply by repeating the things that Trump purposely said to his audiences, I don't know who Tim Kaine was talking to. I mean, all those quotes that he gave were things Trump went out of his way to say, tweet, reinforce, and then double down on. Anybody on the Trump side of the equation has already heard them, and given the way he's doing in the polls, apparently thinks it's okay to hear that stuff. On the Hillary Clinton side, I mean, in terms of trying to win millennial votes, which is apparently a goal of the Clinton campaign at this point, and certainly to try to pull in some of the third-party people. I guess Tim Kaine was trying to continue the scare tactics. But again, a voter that's engaged enough to vote third-party, I suspect, has already heard much of what Tim Kaine had to say. Lastly, I don't understand what the point of Tim Kaine interrupting everybody was. I mean, the Clinton campaign has made a week's worth of fodder out of Donald Trump interrupting her, and then they send their guy out to do exactly the same thing. You just kind of wonder who's in charge of that campaign, and or whether Tim Kaine should simply switch to decaffeinated coffee for future public appearances.
Well, I think a lot of people are saying Tim Kaine lost because of all the interruptions. I think the GOP counted more than 70. At the same time, I mean, Josh, he kind of fell on the grenade, right? He kind of let himself lose that debate, and he kind of undercut a lot of the attacks that Mike Pence was leveling on Hillary. Do you think that was an effect? Do you think that may have been the strategy, and was it effective?
At the risk of doing what I often criticize others for doing, which is writing fan fiction and calling it political analysis, one has to wonder if that's not what Tim Kaine exactly did, which was fall on a grenade, have an almost deliberately poor performance in order to, help shift the horse race narrative. In that, like, oh, Hillary won the first one. Oh no, Tim Kaine lost the second one. Can Hillary win to give her that sort of, to help shift the narrative that way. Again, to attack Trump, and just in case there's anyone watching the vice president debate who hasn't been paying attention to the election, which I can't imagine that person exists, but just enlisting Trump's sins in front of Pence and watching him squirm. I mean, all of those things I think were calculated moments, or at least moments that in the calculations that they did about them, they realized it wasn't going to stretch beyond a news cycle or two. So I feel like it's just stuff to chew on until this weekend when the real debate happens.
The moderator, Elaine Quijano from the digital CBS News Network, caught a lot of criticism from pretty much everybody. Conservatives were mad at her because she interrupted some of Pence's attacks. Liberals are mad at her because she didn't fact-check him at all. Everyone else is mad because everyone just talked over each other. She kept asking questions that they had already answered, and really interrupted a lot of the times they actually finally got to a substantial conversation. Peter, do you think that she deserves some of the blame for – that was a mess last night. I mean, regardless of who won, who did it, that was a disaster. Do you think that was a lot on her, or do you think that a lot of it is on the format and the actual personalities on the stage?
A little bit of both. She certainly did not excel last night, impress anybody, or do as much as she could to keep control of all that. That said, I'm not sure how much more the theoretical best moderator ever could have done. I mean, both of those men last night were out to mess with each other. Whether it was Tim Kaine being nervous and jumping all over Pence's stuff, or Pence just figuring, fuck it, I'll just make up stuff all night. They were not going to play nice. And they were not going to be fair either with each other or with the public, if you will, and certainly not with the format. It was nasty stuff.
They all brought a lot of canned lines that they rehearsed and say all over the campaign trail that they couldn't even deliver on TV properly.
Yeah.
So as you screw up.
Yeah, well, I didn't rehearse that on all of my campaign rallies.
Fair enough.
So I don't know what a quote unquote good moderator could have done. I mean, other than trying to shout them down. So I don't really criticize her too much. She could have made a little good faith effort just to kind of cover herself. But at the end of the day, if these two powerful people who have the spotlight and the microphones are going to go at it like kids, then that's it. Unless you're able to treat them like high school kids who need to be, whacked with a ruler, you're just going to end up with the chaos that's there. Hopefully somebody out there in the American electorate will be paying attention and saying, who are these ass clowns that I'm voting for?
Yeah, I mean, shutting them down is an idea. The first hour of that debate was completely unintelligible. Josh, do you think a better moderator might have handled that better?
I think a more experienced one might have done better, because again, there's no way to know. She's obviously the least experienced of all the moderators selected this year, and so it seemed like she either didn't have the confidence to break away from sort of the plan and the outline that she had down there, or didn't have the authority to do so. Perhaps the producers or whoever said you have to stick to these questions, and she saw herself as a person not to moderate the discussion, but just to get everyone to the next segment. And I think some of what Peter said is true, that maybe at some point she just realized, okay, these guys aren't even taking this fucking seriously. Why should I? So no, I mean, it would have been interesting to see if, say the first time that Tim Kaine listed all those Trump sins, if she hadn't, instead of changing the subject, said, no, hold on, Governor Pence, he just addressed these. Can you address specifically these claims? If only so we wouldn't have to keep hearing that list every subsequent question. I mean, he put the fucking taxes in answers about Syria. So, I mean, it was basically just, you know,
but the other thing,
and it was a conversation of just throwing knives and
back
stuff.
To the question, she just like laughed off, like that was about Syria, and then went on to the next thing without actually going back to the original point.
Yeah, that might be an experience. It might just be like, you know, Peter said, she was like, fuck it. If they're not taking this seriously, why should I? I just work for CBSN.
Yeah, I mean, she's streaming. I mean, you know, geez, might as well, next thing she knows, she's going to be dropping down to the podcast division. You know,
right?
Oh, wait, I didn't mean that. You know, the thing is that literally from the first words out of each man's mouth, they made it clear they're not going to be having a debate, a conversation, a discussion, anything that suggests collaboration. They're basically going to wait for the other guy to take a breath, if even that, and then they're going to start talking. So I'm not sure how you can control all that without doing something so erratic and crazy. You know, Governor Pence, shut up, or something like that. I mean, seriously, which would then become the news, and that would be the meme that the other side would beat to death. So, you know, I give her credit for sticking it out. I'm sure she didn't enjoy herself. I know she got the short end of the stick. You know, you can imagine all the people in the organization who passed on this opportunity that it worked its way down to Elaine.
One of the things I always enjoy talking about is what could have been, and that could have been Chris Christie or Newt Gingrich on that stage. Josh, do you think that either one of them might have done a better job than Pence?
Oh, God. Now, here's the thing. Chris Christie against Tim Kaine, that would have been like watching, you know, an old Roman Empire gladiator game of the lions versus a rabbit. I mean, Chris Christie would have eaten his lunch and dinner. I think that, but again, Chris Christie comes baked in with his own weaknesses. Then we would have had to talk about his tenure as, well, maybe not, because they didn't even bring up the Religious Freedom Act thing.
The Bridgegate trial is literally going on right now.
Yeah. So I feel like there would have been those distractions that would have made it different. But, I mean, in terms of just going back and forth and attacking Hillary Clinton, Chris Christie would have – the Tim Kaine that came out last night would have maybe done all right against Chris Christie, or at least held his own. Like, it seemed like he was prepared for more of an attack dog dickhead instead of the calm, generic Republican that Mike Pence chose, that role that he chose to inhabit.
Yeah, it was almost like jujitsu. You know, the crazier Tim got about all this stuff, you know, the cooler Mike stayed. You know, he made Tim Kaine look really kind of childish. You know, it's like, well, Hillary told me to say this, and Hillary told me to say that. You get the impression that Kaine at some point was scared he wasn't going to get all the talking points in, and, you know, they weren't going to let him have dinner after or something. You know, the other thing, keep in mind what Pence was trying to do. Pence was trying to speak to the sort of, what's the right word? You know, the solid Republican base, not the right-wing nut jobs that Trump, you know, plays like a piano, but the hardcore people who vote Republican election after election, the George Bush Republicans, meaning Dad, George H.W. Bush. You know, they need something to make them feel better about Trump. And I think Mike Pence was in that to send that message. And I think Josh brought it up earlier, and also to lay the groundwork that, you know, hey, guys, just in case this Trump thing doesn't work out, you know, here's a cool, calm, conservative guy who can do stuff for you in 2020, or God help us, 2024, if Clinton does 2 terms and we, in fact, still are having elections at that point.
I mean, it's hard to know what a good vice presidential candidate is, but I think Yeah, I mean, Tim Kaine hasn't made any headlines in the rallies and on the campaign trail. Yesterday was the first time a lot of people saw him, and a lot of people weren't exactly impressed. So, Josh, do you think that maybe Hillary would have been better off going with someone like Liz Warren or Sherrod Brown or Cory Booker?
I definitely think Booker and Brown, Booker and Warren would have been great choices. Sherrod Brown, I've never been sold on him as like this great progressive leader, but maybe. I feel like Sherrod Brown is just a deeper voiced version of Tim Kaine, to be honest.
He's a big Sherrod Brown
but I think
fan. That's all I really know about his liberal credentials. Bernie's a big Sherrod Brown fan, yeah.
I do think someone, though, like Elizabeth Warren or Cory Booker would have had just better political acumen to sort of attack Pence the way that he needed to, because I do think that Peter was absolutely right when he said that Kaine was just getting to the next talking point, getting to the next practice line, making sure he hits all the things. Like, he was definitely following a script and instructions in his head, where I feel like people like Warren and Booker are so used to being on this sort of national stage that they would have at least, been able to navigate that better. People talked on Twitter where there was a meme going around that this was a debate between two dads. And I forget who said it, but someone put out that actually Mike Pence is the dad, Tim Kaine is your little brother. So that's what it felt like. And I feel like if Clinton had gone for a bolder pick for vice president, we would be having a much different discussion. But then again, that's not to say that Kaine didn't do exactly what the Clinton campaign wanted him to do. They I think strategized that this is the best way to, prosecute that. It's been remarkable how little focus there's been on vice presidential candidates.
Well, keep in mind, Tim Kaine has two jobs, really. One, the main one, and I think this is why he was chosen as thing, is
deliver Virginia
for Hillary Clinton. And that's a huge, big deal. If she wins Virginia, that's a lot of votes, and it's an easy state to win if she can bring out the vote, because her voters are collected in Northern Virginia in a fairly confined area. They vote as a block when they get out and vote. So Tim Kaine has to deliver Virginia, and he has to not make any waves and disappear into the background. And so when I think it was you, Igor, who said, he hasn't made many headlines from the campaign trail. Somebody in the Clinton office just said, that's exactly what we want. We don't want him to make headlines. We don't want him to be another Bill. We want him to go out, make the stump speeches in the places that are too small for Hillary to show up in, and then after she's elected, literally blend into the wallpaper and go away. Warren would have been a great asset on the campaign trail, but there's no way in the world Hillary would want to share the White House with someone as strong as Elizabeth Warren. Cory Booker, sure, great thing, but I don't want to be as cynical as the Clintons are, but basically, hey, black guy thing's been done. Brown, he's okay. But I think the Clinton people realize that, Ohio isn't their year for Ohio. So why waste a hometown boy on a state that they're not confident they're going to win? You end up with
Kasich would get to pick his replacement. Same with Warren. There's a Republican governor in Massachusetts.
And Booker.
Good point.
Yeah.
Josh, you wrote last night that Mike Pence was prepping for his 2020 presidential run with that performance, and I saw there was some conservatives questioning why Pence wasn't on top of the ticket. Well, first of all, if Mike Pence had run, he'd be an afterthought by January because Trump beat 16 Pences along the way. But so if you're wondering why Mike Pence isn't on the top of the ticket, look at the GOP voters. But you wrote that he's gearing up for 2020. Do you think he could be a legit contender, given that he's not even that popular in his own state, and he's not that different from someone like Ted Cruz or even Rick Santorum or Mike Huckabee?
Well, as someone who got every early prediction of the 2016 primary completely wrong, let me tell you what's going to happen in 4 years. Gil Mentum. It's really going to pick up. Actually, no. According to Mike Pence, I never supported Rubio, and I never thought he was good. I don't know why you would say I said that. But no, seriously, I do think that if Trump loses, which I do think is still an if question. This is by no means, I think, in the bag. I think anything could happen in the next 30 or so days that would swing things around. But if Trump loses, there will be a giant sucking vacuum at the top of the Republican Party. And there's sort of two schools of thought that I've seen.
It wasn't the vacuum this year. That's why you had 17 candidates to begin with.
No, I don't think it was a vacuum. I think it was just a disorganized mishmash of people who thought it was their time. There was no dominant leader, but there were all these little, these fucking Fox News guests who they could, put up for the primary. But I feel like, because this is an ideological election, Trump's not a conservative in the traditional sense. And so the evangelical conservatives who are all concerned, like Mike Pence, who are all concerned about gay marriage, religious freedom, they're kind of taking a back seat. Ted Cruz, that's part of his loss. The establishment guys, your Jebs, your Rubios, they kind of fell off. There's no real sort of defining characteristic of the party anymore. So the two schools of thoughts are either it's going to be someone who has no relation to Trump at all, from like Cruz having lost to him, he's out. Pence being a VP, he's out. It'll be just someone we've never heard of, maybe, or just whose star is just on the rise, like a Joni Ernst, something like that. I feel like they'll want to do the woman thing in 2020. So it might be someone like that, or if the race is close enough and the Trumpists in the electorate stay vocal and energized, a guy like Pence might be really poised to come in and fill that hole by saying, well, Trump picked me. He saw that our visions were compatible, but I am a sane, rational person who doesn't have to yell. And, he may even wash away that whole, not completely, but won't be so hyped on the evangelical thing. There's no real way to know, of course, but I feel like it could go one of those ways. And so Pence, the smart money is to gamble on setting himself up to be one of the guys that the people in the party look to pick up the pieces after 2016.
Peter, do you think that's what the party needs, is another hardcore religious zealot that's running for the same office?
What it needs and what it'll do are probably different things. That said, Pence, the problem with Pence, if Trump loses and Pence tries, is he's tainted with the loss. And his opponent is just going to eat that, that's going to become talking point number one is, hey,
I know. Look at 2012's vice presidential nominee. He's doing very poorly for himself. Oh, wait.
Begging for Paul Ryan to come back a few months ago.
Right.
I think I really don't know why you're disparaging Joe Biden, but okay. I guess you guys really don't support the troops or their fathers. The idea is that. So I don't think Pence he's got that huge thing against him, which is he was part of assuming Trump doesn't win. He's part of a losing team. That puts him in a bad place. It hands over a huge weapon to his opponents, both primary and on the Democratic side. So that's that. I think what the Republicans need is, fresh faces, new voices, someone who can speak to the large number of dissatisfied Democrats who would love to vote for a slightly right of center person who can just kind of rein in the screeching about gay rights and guns and abortions and all that.
That's why I thought, John Kasich would be running away with this election right now.
John Kasich would be up by 50 points, right? And he'd be in the Bahamas taking a couple of weeks off at this point.
Really
he
bad
would be
time
so
to
far
go to the Bahamas right now.
Well, okay, fine. Whatever, Acapulco, wherever. He could be in southern Ohio. There's good stuff to see there. The point is that a guy like Kasich who could find a way to appeal to the right, I hate these words right and left, they're too broad, but I mean the rightish side of the Democrats, the fiscal conservative Democrats, the war is not a bad thing altogether, Democrats, and just kind of back off on these social issues, which are pretty much already decided. You know, for all the noise, nobody's going to repeal the Second Amendment, for God's sakes. You know, the Supreme Court is the one who decides what happens with abortions and marriage rights and stuff like that. I mean, the president can play a role. You know, if the Republicans wanted to win, what they should do is put up somebody who fits those things. But what they will do is they will find someone who looks and talks like Mike Pence, who appeals to the evangelicals and appeals to the far right, and basically says to the other middle of the road Republicans, you know, hey, it's me or Hillary. What are you going to do?
Ironically,
if Republicans were smart, they would.
This would have been the year
I was just
to
gonna say,
get someone in there to get people on the Supreme Court to undo all those abortion and gay marriage rulings. I mean, you're talking about 3-4 spots possibly opening up for the next president by 2020. That's all gone.
Yeah, that's true. We'll see what happens with the Supreme Court. You know, the court has had some surprises.
Oh, I was going to just say that I feel like that what the GOP should do is take a lesson out of the Libertarian Party's book, and I don't mean, you know, not knowing what countries are. They already have that in Trump. But to do that thing where, you know, they became we're just the common sense guys. I mean, that used to be the Republican line is we're the party of common sense, the common sense thing. And that's sort of what Gary Johnson and Bill Weld especially get at, is this idea of common sense governance, not being beholden to ideology, working with people. I mean, half of the reason I think people like Bill Weld so much is because he's so willing to compromise on these like libertarian principles of the government not taking action in certain matters. And so that works shitty for a libertarian candidate, but as a sort of a model for a future Republican, you know, if they could get, you know, Joni Ernst or, you know, some ethnic minority to
moderate Republican.
No, none of them. Well, none of them actually are, because like Peter was saying, these labels are fucking meaningless now, you know? You have John Kasich saying that he's a moderate, but his record is incredibly conservative. And then you had, when 4 years ago, you had Mitt Romney, who was a George H.W. Bush Republican, saying his conservative principles have shaped his life. I mean, it's all theater. So I feel like what they need to do is they haven't had principles as a party, I think, probably since Bush got out of office, maybe even before, depending on whether you think the Bush administration had any principles to speak of at all. But they've been rudderless since then, and all they've done is they've gone the talk radio route, and that's how we ended up with Trump. If we can get, you know, if Republicans can get some kind of forward-thinking message, something that's not trying to appeal to the talk radio hosts, they might be able to start building a consensus, getting back some of the voters they lost, and making some kind of a challenge at the national level for Democrats. I mean, the strategy that they have now, holding on to state and local governments, that's, you know, as gerrymandering gets struck down, voter ID laws get overturned, and the demographics of states change, that's going to change.
I want to pick up on something Josh said about Bill Weld and the Libertarian. This is, you know, one of the great disappointments of this year's election is, you know, this was the chance for a strong third-party candidate. And the Libertarians came up with a guy who seems, and I don't mean this as an insult or a slur, I mean, he seems almost borderline autistic in Gary Johnson. And I say that with sincerity and not as an insult or anything like that. I mean, he seems truly confused. He seems overwhelmed by questions sometimes. Too much information, too much stimulus, and he just kind of cracks up a little bit. But yet, there's so much cry among the electorate, a significant portion of them, for someone who can address them rationally, who doesn't go apeshit over these social hot-button issues which drive Democrats away instantly. I think a lot of the Hillary voters who will reluctantly vote for her are more fiscal conservative than they would say so. I mean, they just don't want to hear that word. They don't want to hear themselves described as fiscal conservatives, or they don't want to hear themselves described as defense conservatives or these things. They want to hear themselves described in broader terms. People who believe in humanitarian intervention. You don't want to just say, "Oh, let's just bomb the fuck out of some cities and hope we kill a few ISIS guys." No, you want to say humanitarian intervention. You want to say, Obama's good at those kind of words. You want to say, economic policies that respect the middle class, yada, yada, yada. I mean, that's what they want. They want the coverage, the safety net of not having to talk to their friends about why the hell they're voting for a Republican. And this would have been a year for the Libertarians if they had had a strong candidate to really pull in a chunk of the vote, a big enough chunk that whoever loses in November would have to turn and say, no, wait a minute, not only did we lose to the other candidate, we saw 20% of the vote go to a third party. What can we do to grab a piece of that third party vote? Hillary doesn't have a clue. All she's trying to do is scare everybody into voting, third-party people into voting for her. That's not really a strategy. That's sort of a desperation. But there's such a yearning out there for something new. Disappointing that I don't think either party really understands or respects that. They sort of just brush Trump off as a one-off, a Carney Act, whatever. And then, of course, nobody in the mainstream media is willing to say anything about third-party candidates other than when Gary Johnson, pulls off a so-called gaffe.
I'm actually surprised they're not having a third-party debate. They had one in 2012. It was Gary Johnson, Joe Stein. No one was polling over 2%. They weren't polling anywhere near what they're polling now. And it was on Russia Today and Ora TV. But still, at least do a debate. Now would be the time to do it. Josh? We're all talking about how Trump is preparing for his next debate. The one thing I will give Pence credit for is, despite blatantly lying through the entire thing, he did show it's possible to come off looking like a winner while running on Trump's constantly moving positions and record. Do you think that Trump will actually look at this debate and learn something from it, or is he just going to barrow through the next one like he did last week?
It all depends on the Trump ego. Because, again, just today before we were doing the podcast, I was looking on cable news, and they streamed a little bit of a Trump rally from Nevada where he was again doing the thing where he was talking about, wouldn't it be great if we could be friends with Russia, and then we bomb the hell out of ISIS. And this was after last night Mike Pence laid out basically a neoconservative vision for dealing with Russian aggression, which I thought was possibly a way of the Trump campaign to introduce new policy, but now I'm thinking that it's just more that was just Mike Pence being deft in the debate because he knows he knows Trump's position on it is absurd, so he was like, well, let me just say what Republicans are supposed to say.
It's absurd on Russia, it's absurd on Korea and Japan, it's absurd on so many levels. I don't know how, no Republican can really accept what he thinks.
If the stories about Trump being mad at Pence are true and not just a rat fuck from someone, I feel like then Trump won't learn. If they're not true, though, and if he is able to adopt, if not Mike Pence's sort of delivery, because that would never work, but at least his positions, take that debate transcript and the lies that he told, make them the truth by saying, yes, this is what I've always believed. The new debate, the next debate might go more, differently than we expect.
Trump has, at every stage in the campaign where someone has said, this is it for him. I remember back just this summer with the Democratic Convention when the Kaine family, remember, they came out and talked about their son who got killed and everything.
Such an idiot. I was like, yeah, this is it.
Everyone said this is it. There was Trump, dumping shit on a Gold Star family, and they were good Muslims, not the bad kind. This is it for Trump, and yet, there he is. So I think Trump understands or doesn't care or whatever he does, he doubles down. That's what he does. So I think you're going to see him Trump, but more Trump. The key, I think, to Sunday is not so much whether it's going to be a calm Trump or a Trumpy Trump. The key is going to be whether he allows himself to be pulled off the topic the way he did last time, where his concluding remarks are basically about Rosie O'Donnell. If he stays full Trump, but stays on the email, stays on Goldman Sachs, stays on the Clinton Foundation, and just does nothing but keep pounding on her like that. See, he's got to pull the Democratic votes away from her. He's got to pull them either to himself or send them to a third party candidate. It doesn't matter. Either one serves his purpose. And so the more he can throw doubts in those people who are saying, oh, Jesus, I'm going to vote for Hillary, the more he can put something in their heads, he wins. He doesn't have to talk to his base. They know what he wants to say. But when he throws that opportunity away and ends up about Miss America and shit like that, he's going to waste his time Sunday night. He better have something useful to say about those tax returns. And if it was me and Donald, if you're out there, look, it's very, very simple. You say that these tax returns were 21 years ago. You took all the deductions that were legal to you. Hillary Clinton doesn't understand how business works. And before we start talking about releasing tax forms, Madam Secretary, I want you to release your transcripts from your speeches from Goldman Sachs, the 33,000 emails that you sent, the full financial records of the Clinton Foundation, put them all on the table here, and then let's take a look at that. And then we can go back and start with my tax returns from 20 years ago instead of 21 years ago. If he can do that, what is she going to say to that? No, I'm not going to do it.
I mean, the one thing that debate did also was stop this sort of catastrophic week from him with the Miss Universe thing that Peter mentioned and the tax return thing. Josh, do you think that the New York Times report is as damaging as the media has made it out to be, or is it not really going to sway anyone because they already believed it anyway?
I mean, that's a great question because it should matter. Again, and this is the story of 2016. It should matter, especially since it coming right on the heels of him saying not paying taxes makes him smart. And again, to the hardcore Trumpists, whatever he says is gospel, and that means it is smart, and he fucking showed him, go Donald. But for the people, again, the ones on the fence who are, oh, Hillary, or, those people might not like this. And it might, and again, the way that they're handling the response is, I think, important. If Trump just came out and said, yes, that happened because those losses carried over from the 1990 recession, that's true. Since then, my taxes look different. I can't release them because of the audit, and moved on. It probably would have played a little better. But instead, they don't deny it. They start talking about how he's a genius when it comes to taxes. I don't think it's going to work on the people that it needs to work with. It's not going to lose Trump his hardcore support. The hardcore Hillary haters are going to stay because he's not Hillary, no matter how many taxes he doesn't pay. But I think there will be some, independents who that will weigh on their decision. And if the election really is this sort of increasing pile of negatives for either candidate, I think that unless there's a new revelation about Clinton that they mishandle, and Trump somehow manages to stay on prompter for the rest of the year, or for the rest of the race, they might get even again, but right now Trump's pile of garbage is just way higher and it stinks worse.
Peter, I saw, was downplaying, again on Twitter, downplaying how important these tax returns are. And I mean, the guy is something of a con man who doesn't have any political record, and he doesn't have any kind of real stance except his business career and his financial dealings that we can actually look at. His biggest claim to fame is how successful he is. Why don't you think it's a big deal?
Well, first of all the things you said are true about Trump, as the things Tim Kaine said about him last night, and none of it matters. He is despite all of those things, he's the Republican nominee, and he's running essentially tied with Hillary Clinton.
Not this week.
Well, he's ahead in Ohio. It's not like she's pulling away. I didn't see the polls today.
Okay, fight too. It's the first poll in a while where he hasn't been up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. He's
back in the margin of error.
Whatever you want to phrase it. The point is that they're running very, very close to one another. So you can't just say, well, look, he's got all this trash piled up around him, because it's been piled up around him since before he started running. All the stuff they're talking about him being an asshole on The Apprentice show. I mean, yeah. I mean, we watched it. Yeah, what's new there? So I think the tax returns fall into much that same category. I don't know how many Americans out there aren't saying to themselves, Jesus, I wish I didn't have to pay any taxes. I'm not real happy that Trump didn't, but man, I wish I could take some deductions like that. Very few large corporations pay taxes. The New York Times paid no taxes in 2014. Most of our large companies don't pay taxes. Most of our middle-class schlups, such as ourselves or lower, do pay taxes because we don't have access to these kinds of deductions. And so I just don't get what the big deal is. And the more the Democrats, Tim Kaine was all over this last night, about, Trump doesn't support the troops because he doesn't pay his taxes. I mean, sorry.
That's a good one. I have to admit, that one's kind of good.
What pile of crap is that? I mean, the military budget is in the gazillions and trillions, and Trump's taxes, if he had paid straight up off the ride, he might have bought a tank or something like that. These things are just so overblown. I think Americans who understand their taxes are just looking at this and shaking their heads and saying, I just really don't get it. In fact, I don't want to sound like I support Trump, because I don't support him as a candidate, but I also am sick of false reporting. And, the idea is that every business in America seeks to minimize its tax burden. Every time I log into the Van Buren portfolio, on Fidelity.com or whatever like that, there's some kind of mention there.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
What's your password?
The password is Hillary is a man. 1, 2, 3. So, the idea is that every time I log in there's some notice telling me how to maximize my returns by having a tax-savvy investment strategy. I think people get that. They understand that. So I just don't see what the tempest is over this. The fact that these are 21 years old, that there's only 3 pages out of what must be, a 300-page tax return filing from Trump. The fact that they were leaked doesn't add much to it. The fact that they were leaked just after Hillary Clinton announced, I think he's got something to hide. I suspect on Sunday, here's a prediction. On Sunday, she's gonna hit this thing, like a fly on shit. And early next week, the New York Times is going to unveil some additional tax documents that they probably already have, that'll come out right after the debate. So make a note on the calendar. There's my prediction. We'll see what happens.
That's a good one. I think you might be right. I will say this that I have to disagree with, though, about it, is because, we have to look at, and again, the theme of this election is LOL, nothing matters. But I do think that if you look at sort of how Trump has shaped his sort of political persona, in that, one, he's this kick-ass businessman, and two, that, his whole campaign was railing on rich guys not paying taxes, cheating this, gaming the system, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if his argument with the fact that and here's the thing, if he had put his taxes out 7-8 months ago and said, look, haven't paid taxes for 30 years, isn't that bullshit? Isn't this bullshit that I haven't paid taxes for 30 years? It's legal. Check it out. And this is what I want to change. If he had done that, he'd be winning probably by 7 points. But since he's being a little weasel and hiding behind it, again, with the people who are undecided voters, who I'm told exist, and I know everything that there is to know about them, but how are people still undecided at this point? But if there are genuine persuadables out there, this will, I think, be one of those things that factors into that decision and not in Trump's favor.
But let me remind you of a previous Trumpscapade, and that was back.
Trumpscapade is a good word.
You're welcome, Mr. Kaine, Senator Kaine. The thing, if you remember back, I can't recall exactly where it was in the primary, but one of Trump's primary opponents got all up his ass about the fact that he donate to Democratic candidates. As well as Republicans, and in fact, he donated to the Clinton campaign or the Clinton Foundation or something like that. And, Trump's spin on that was, I know how to play this system. I'm a scumbag who actually knows the scummy rules, and so who would better to go into Washington and clean it up than a guy who knows how to play dirty and knows where the dirty little corners are. And he got away with it, and it was a good line, and it put that whole thing behind him.
It's what he's using now. That's his argument now.
Yeah. And the only problem here is he made a strategic mistake. I agree with you, by letting the tax stuff come out rather than revealing it himself and turning it into a positive. I think it's too late for him to produce his tax returns at this point. The Democrats will just pick up on whatever they find in there, and there's not a lot of time before the election. He's going to have to stick it out, I think, and keep the tax returns to himself. But we'll see if he's able to kind of do that. I mean, a lot of people think a business who finds a way not to pay taxes is a smart-run business.
But these are his personal taxes. It's not his business taxes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but they have to do with the losses his businesses took. The idea of creating losses to balance out your gains is not a bad business thing, particularly, if you could structure those losses so they're, quote unquote, paper losses, depreciation and big words I don't fully understand, but accountants do.
Something assets.
Yeah. I want to circle back to you mentioned the polls and how they're tied, and I mean a lot has changed in the last week. Hillary before the debate was down in Colorado, and now there's two polls showing her up by 11 points there. Before she was up by a couple in Pennsylvania. Right now, two polls have her anywhere by 10 to 12. The polls show her up in Florida, North Carolina, and Nevada. Just today, that Monmouth poll that we mentioned earlier came out, showed her up by a couple in Ohio, where Trump has been up since the end of August. The national polls have her anywhere from 5 to 10 points up. Josh, we're just a month out from Election Day, so at some point, one of these calls about is this it will eventually be it. What would it take now for Hillary to squander away this kind of lead? Because this is the best poll number she's seen since the convention.
Well, I think that what it would take is either it would have to be two things. If Trump goes back, to behaving and not really, being the Trump that has caused all these problems the past couple weeks, he might gain some ground back. But that has to be met. Because remember, after the August thing, after the con debacle and the conventions, Trump started going, they shook up the campaign. And that was kind of the last negative story about Trump because he went on prompter, didn't make waves. And then the FBI reports, they started releasing the notes. So the email thing became big. So if there's another confluence of that, if Trump has a killer debate and then WikiLeaks or somebody puts out some kind of smoking gun document, that I think could flip the polling. Otherwise, it seems like there's too much ground to gain for Trump to gain back and too few paths for him to get to 270 for it to turn around. But again, I do think the Monmouth poll. Just caveat. I do think, because the other poll that had Hillary up by 12 after the convention was also a Monmouth poll. So I'm almost wondering if their sample isn't a little overweighted to Hillary's side of things. But as long as she holds on to PA, as long as North Carolina, as long as they stay statistically tied in North Carolina and Ohio, and I have a piece up coming out on Latest today about what Trump and white voters. If he doesn't get at least 22 to 25% of white voters, there's no chance he can win.
Isn't that amazing? This is a guy who bet his entire campaign on white voters, and he's not even performing Mitt Romney, who had the advantage of running against the black guy.
I want to add to Josh's scenarios. I agree. This is Hillary's race to lose at this point, and she may pull that off. We'll see.
Democrats are really good at that.
So I mean, let's look at the Trump side of the equation. I mean, basically, he's got to do a really good job Sunday night in the debate.
No, he
can't be seen. Pardon me?
No, he absolutely has to. The debates are pivotal.
Yeah. This is close to life or death with him, absent an outside thing. He's simply got to do a good job. He can't walk out of this people saying he lost. He's got to not give her a second bounce. That's critical. He screws this up on Sunday. The only thing left at that point to help him win would be an external event, and that would be something like a serious enough terror attack that his message of strength and things are going to carry him. Something like, so one of these October surprises about Hillary that we keep hearing noises about, or something ridiculous like Hillary collapsing on stage or something along those lines. So Trump has, to my mind, Trump has exactly one winning factor he has any control of whatsoever, and that is his debate performance Sunday night. After that, if he screws this up on Sunday, then really all he's got left is looking up at the sky and praying for a snow day. Otherwise, it's over.
Yeah, rain on Election Day helps Republicans. That is historically true.
That's good. That's one other point, though, I didn't mention, which is critical, and that is turnout. Hillary, that's her got to get it part of all this, assuming there is no external event, that she doesn't screw something up, that Trump just mumbles along. The last obstacle Hillary has is turnout. She's got to make sure that the African-American voters get out to the polls, the Hispanic voters get out to the polls, that she energizes her middle-class, educated white people voters. She's got to get them all out there to vote. They can't sit this one out. And that's tricky because her support, is kind of limpy in those things. I think if a lot of those people, if they see Trump losing in the polls, their enthusiasm is just going to go, down, and they may just say, all right, fine, I didn't want to vote for her, and now I don't have to. Scary.
Josh mentioned WikiLeaks. So yesterday there was first of all, a report that Guccifer, the new Guccifer, not the real one, possibly hacking the Clinton Foundation, and it doesn't appear that was the case. But he has gotten his hands on quite a lot of internal Democratic documents, and WikiLeaks teased that big document dump that they said would hurt Clinton. And all the conservatives, the Alex Joneses of the world, got up at like 3 a.m.
Oh, that video.
Live. And Alex Jones had a goddamn mental breakdown. Oh, that was worth watching. But all right, so Julian Assange still teasing this thing that they have quote unquote significant documents that they're going to release ahead of the convention. Josh, how much credence would you put into these stories, and do you think that there is something so damaging that they have their hands on that they could release that will actually cost her the election, as Roger Stone seems to think it will?
I almost would believe that WikiLeaks could do what they're doing, because now my view of WikiLeaks has always been that it's been more about Assange himself and his sort of profile than really anything that they've done. So it seems to me like if he could, come out with something and be like, aha, we found it, I did it, he would have done it by now. I feel like if it wasn't, the idea that 2 days, a week before the election, he'll put out some smoking gun document. Well, people won't even really have time to fully process that.
No, our attention span is like a couple days for any news story, so that's all it really takes. If it's more than a few days, it'll be long forgotten.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I think that the likelihood of anything significant or damning coming out is low. But again, I also don't put much scandal weight on what has come out. That said, if something remotely, these Guccifer 2.0 leaks were obviously other stuff. Like he was lying about it coming from the Clinton Foundation. If they're able to leak something that is just possibly true, kind of, like those email leaks that happened after the Democratic National Convention, I think it could hurt Hillary. Because again, if Trump is being good and the focus is on Hillary and rumor and innuendo, her campaign's terrible at defending it. Everyone already has that baked-in suspicion of her. That could, I think, affect the race. And Peter's right. I did forget I love one. I love them.
Sorry. Okay. Hillary Clinton's email server was fully unsecured, unencrypted, and broadcasting wirelessly on her first visit to Russia, as well as China. If the intelligence services in those countries did not pull that information down, then they're idiots. I mean, anybody with a Radio Shack scanner and a Raspberry Pi could have grabbed those emails. If I was sitting on that information, either in Moscow or Beijing or wherever, the last thing I would do is allow it to leak out ahead of this election. I would sit there and wait for Hillary to be elected, which I think is what's going to happen here. And I would just smile and smile on our first meeting and say, Madam President, look at this. And I would basically say to her, I want to cooperate with you. This is not blackmail. I did you a favor. This is how you do it. I mean, this is what intelligence professionals do. They don't blackmail. They turn it into a positive thing. And they would say, Madam President, I did you a favor. I could have, I pulled these back out of WikiLeaks' hands in October. Now, shall we talk?
Yeah, that is some of that good fan fiction as analysis that I do so love.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Let's ponder that until Sunday, and we'll come back next week and talk about the debate. I'm pretty sure this is the one where Trump whips his dick out, but we'll have to wait and see. Thanks for
fingers crossed. Tiny fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Keep reading Latest.com.